Something deeply alarming is happening inside Iran right now, and the world's top intelligence analysts, foreign policy experts, and regional insiders are all saying the same thing. The men now running Iran's regime are not the same as those who came before them. They are more hardline, more unpredictable, more willing to push the world toward the edge. And the grave fears being raised in capitals from Washington to London to Tel Aviv are not speculation. They are based on real behavior, real decisions, and a real shift in the ideological DNA of the Islamic Republic's inner circle. If you care about what happens next in the Middle East, and what it means for the rest of the world, you need to watch this video right now. Because this is not a drill. This is not a political talking point. This is a warning that serious people are taking very seriously. Welcome to Foxy Global News, the channel where we cut through the noise and give you the real story behind the world's most critical headlines. We don't do sensationalism. We don't do spin. We do deep, honest, fearless journalism. The kind that respects your intelligence and gives you the context you need to understand the world as it actually is, not as someone wants you to believe it is. If you are new here, welcome. And please subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because global events are moving fast and this channel is where you stay ahead of them. Our community of informed, engaged viewers is growing every single day, and we are grateful for every single one of you. Now, let's get into this story, because what is happening inside Iran's leadership right now has implications that reach far beyond the Middle East, and every person watching this needs to understand it. To understand why so many analysts are raising grave fears about Iran's current leadership, we need to start with what changed and when. For decades, Iran's political system operated with a certain internal tension. On one side were the hardliners, the ideological purists who believed in exporting revolution, confronting the West at every turn, and never compromising on the core tenets of the Islamic Republic. On the other were the pragmatists, figures who, while still deeply committed to the regime's survival, understood that economic reality, international diplomacy, and the needs of the Iranian people required a degree of flexibility. That tension, that internal friction, actually served as a kind of brake on the most extreme impulses of the system. Not a perfect brake, not a reliable one, but a real one. That brake is gone. The consolidation of power within Iran's ruling circles over the past 2 to 3 years has systematically removed the pragmatist voices from positions of meaningful influence. What remains is a leadership core that is ideologically uniform in a way that Iran's government has not been since the earliest and most radical days of the revolution in the 1980s. And that uniformity is what is generating grave fears among those who watch Iran most closely. Let's talk about the specific figures and the specific behaviors that are driving this concern. Since the death of former President Ibrahim Raisi and the elevation of new figures within the executive and security establishment, analysts have noted a marked shift in Iran's tone, its decision-making speed, and its willingness to take risks that previous leadership would have considered too dangerous. The nuclear program has accelerated in ways that the International Atomic Energy Agency has publicly described as deeply troubling. Enrichment levels have reached a point that puts Iran closer to weapons-grade material than at any point in the regime's history, and the new leadership has shown no meaningful interest in the kind of diplomatic off-ramps that even hardline predecessors occasionally explored. At the same time, Iran's support for its network of regional proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militia groups in Iraq and Syria, has not decreased in the face of military pressure and diplomatic isolation. If anything, the strategic commitment to these relationships has deepened. This tells analysts something important. The new leadership is not recalibrating in response to pressure. It is doubling down, and that pattern of behavior, escalating rather than retreating when challenged, is precisely what makes this moment so dangerous. The Iranian people themselves are caught in the middle of all this. The brutal crackdown following the woman life freedom protests of 2022 and 2023 made it absolutely clear that the current leadership is willing to use lethal force against its own citizens with no hesitation and no remorse. The faces of the protest movement, young women, students, ordinary Iranians demanding basic dignity, were met with bullets, mass arrests, and executions. And rather than moderating after that moment of internal crisis, the regime emerged from it more entrenched, more paranoid, and more convinced that any sign of softness would be exploited as weakness. That mentality, that siege mentality, now defines the worldview of the people at the top of Iran's power structure. Western intelligence agencies have been quietly raising red flags about this shift for some time. Officials in the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, countries that spent years trying to preserve the diplomatic framework of the Iran nuclear deal, have privately acknowledged that the partners they negotiated with no longer exist in any meaningful sense. The people who might have signed an agreement, who might have been persuaded by economic incentives, who might have weighed the costs of confrontation against the benefits of engagement, those people are no longer in the room. What is in the room now is a leadership that has concluded that the West will never accept Iran as a regional power on its own terms, and that the only language that commands respect is the language of force, deterrence, and ideological defiance. This shift has profound implications for Israel, for the Gulf states, for U.S. forces in the region, and for global energy markets. Iran's geographic position, straddling the Persian Gulf, bordering Iraq, sharing waters with the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows, means that a more aggressive, more reckless Iranian leadership is not just a regional problem. It is a global one. Any significant escalation in the Gulf, any miscalculation that leads to direct military confrontation, would send shockwaves through energy prices, financial markets, and the fragile stability of a world already stretched by conflict elsewhere. There is also a nuclear dimension to these fears that cannot be overstated. Iran is not a nuclear-armed state today, but the technical gap between where Iran is and where it would need to be to produce a nuclear weapon has narrowed to a point that alarms even the most measured analysts. The current leadership has shown no appetite for the negotiations that might close that gap diplomatically, and the calculation among some within the regime that a nuclear deterrent is the ultimate guarantor of the Islamic Republic's survival appears to be gaining ground in internal discussions in a way it never quite did under previous leadership configurations. This is the core of the grave fear, not that war is inevitable, but that the people now making decisions in Tehran are less afraid of it than any Iranian leadership in a generation. What should the world do with this information? That is a question governments are wrestling with right now, and there are no easy answers. Maximum pressure campaigns have not produced the behavioral change they promised. Diplomatic engagement has lost its domestic political support within Iran's leadership. Military options carry risks of escalation that could spiral beyond anyone's control. The honest answer from most serious analysts is that the world is in a genuinely dangerous moment with Iran, and that navigating it will require a combination of firm deterrence, creative diplomacy, and a willingness to engage with hard truths rather than comfortable assumptions. What it cannot afford is complacency. What it cannot afford is the assumption that things will somehow sort themselves out. The people raising grave fears about Iran's changed leadership are not alarmists. They are realists, and the world needs to listen. Let's bring this together. The grave fears about Iran's leadership are rooted in something real and documented: a systematic consolidation of power by hardline figures, the removal of pragmatist voices, an accelerating nuclear program, deepening proxy commitments, a brutal posture toward the Iranian people themselves, and a leadership psychology that treats pressure as a reason to escalate rather than reconsider. This is not the Iran of 5 years ago. And the world needs to understand that, clearly and urgently. This is exactly the kind of story that Foxy Global News exists to cover, deeply, honestly, and without flinching. If this video gave you clarity on a story that matters, please hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps this channel reach more people who deserve to be informed. Subscribe if you have not already, and turn on your notifications because we are covering the stories that shape your world every single week. And drop a comment below. What do you think the world's response to Iran's changing leadership should be? I want to hear your perspective. This is Foxy Global News. Stay informed, stay sharp, and we will see you in the next one.